You're watching Divorce Shield Live, the weekly show for men who are thinking about going through or recovering from divorce. I'm John Knocklinger, the men's divorce coach and mentor. I'm a recovering divorce attorney and the founder of Divorce Shield, a company devoted to helping men plan for and navigate divorce. Today, my guest is Nanci Smith. She is an attorney in Vermont, and she is, more importantly, a collaborative divorce attorney, and we're going to learn what that means very soon. She has been trained exclusively in what we call alternative dispute resolution, which is a fancy way of saying ways of getting divorced without going to court. Thank you so much for being here today, Nanci.
Thanks for having me.
Very excited to talk to you because most people, when they start the divorce process, think that there is only one way to get divorced. And unfortunately, many attorneys are really not very good at educating potential clients that there is more than one way to get divorced. So why don't we kind of start back years ago, and can you tell us a little bit, Nanci, about how you got into the collaborative law community and what exactly is collaborative law?
Great, sure, thanks. So let's take ourselves back to 2005. I was a young divorce lawyer. I didn't have children. I wasn't even married. Yet I was fighting litigation and doing custody cases. And I think I started to have a gnawing feeling that I wasn't really serving the children when I was doing that. I just started feeling like no matter if you, quote, win your custody case, I've just left, a wreck behind me. And then the lawyers get to move on, but the clients are stuck with each other and having had really hard feelings generated as part of the adversarial process. So somehow, I'm not exactly sure how, but these things happen. I got turned on to a woman named Pauline Tesler from Northern California, who wrote a book that was published by the American Bar Association called Collaborative Divorce Practice. And it literally changed my experience of how I wanted to practice law and family law in particular. And it just changed everything. So what it is, collaborative divorce is a out of court, no court. No, the lawyers don't go to court. We don't threaten to go to court. It's a non-adversarial process, and it's interdisciplinary, which means that you have a team that helps you work your way through the emotions that are always present at the beginning of a divorce. So when people are first thinking about a divorce, it's hard to even think straight. It's so emotional. It's such a roller coaster. I've been divorced. Nothing in my life has ever brought me to my knees, like, acknowledging that my marriage had failed and that now what? I'm a divorce lawyer getting divorced. I mean, the irony nearly killed me. But I knew that there are alternatives, and your mindset is so important. And so at the beginning, when you're thinking about getting divorced, if you can look at it through the lens of grief and realize that you're going to experience so much intense emotionality. And I say to clients, divorce is 80% emotional, 10% legal, 10% financial. So what that means is when you're feeling like your amygdala has been hijacked, right? Like you feel like primal worry and anxiety and fear, and you feel like you're either being attacked or you need to defend yourself. That whole adversarial nature, that mindset that divorce brings up, just mentioning the word divorce sends people into a state where they either freeze or want to run away and ignore and or fight back. And so if you can recognize that that's kind of happening on a cellular level, and recognize that you have alternatives. So your first call should really not be to an adversarial lawyer who I describe as, we're trained in the dark art of adversarial warfare. Like, that's not the first call. Like, I think your first call should be to a mental health professional or a divorce coach, like John, somebody who can help you normalize all your intense emotions so that you're not leading with emotion. And it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. The emotionality is there, and you want to try to handle that first before you start making major decisions about your children and your financial future. So it's just a process that is like mediation, but I call it mediation on steroids. It's for couples that know that they just need a little more support, that they want to have the value of an attorney on their side who's going to be in their corner, backing them up, being available to advocate for them if they need it, but in a way that the advocacy is not going to be offensive. It's not going to be aggressive. It's not going to make things worse. And that's what we all commit to, is a process that allows couples to emerge healthy and wholehearted instead of bitter and resentful.
Yeah, and I want to go through the nuts and bolts of it in a few minutes. But I think what you were just talking about a minute ago, mindset is the most important part of achieving a successful divorce. And a successful divorce, obviously that's subjective, but that just really means that you've come out of the process not feeling like you're broken. That's what I tell people is, no one ever loves the way that a divorce is resolved. I mean, if you're going to have to pay money to your ex-spouse, sure, you're not going to like paying the money. If you don't get to see your kids as much as you want to see them, you're not going to love that. But it's about being content. It's about feeling like at least you were heard, it's a fair resolution, and that you've gotten to a place that you were part of the process of getting there. But I think what the problem a lot of times is that, and I see this a lot with my men that I coach, is that sometimes they're so adverse to the even concept of getting divorced, and they can't even get their head out of the sand long enough to recognize that it's going to happen whether they want it to happen or not. So if you're in that position where you just cannot even accept that you're getting divorced, how can you get somebody to a place where they will enter this collaborative law process when they don't even want a divorce in the first place?
Sure. It's really common that somebody's been thinking about the divorce for, in my experience, up to a year before they actually have the courage to speak up and use their words and tell their spouse they want a divorce. So the person who's initiating the divorce is way ahead of the person who's just receiving it for the first time. And everybody often feels that they're getting blindsided. They didn't see it coming. It's out of left field. And that's all emotional. So if your first call is to a collaboratively trained attorney, and you can just Google collaborative divorce lawyer near me, you can at least be assured, whether you want the divorce or not, that you're not going to be rushed off to the courthouse to start making decisions and be on a time schedule that's determined by the court instead of you and your spouse. And then even in the collaborative process, the team. So we don't allow stonewalling and stalling, but we definitely provide enough space for your one spouse to catch up, emotionally to catch up. So I would tell my client, if my client were the one who was initiating the divorce and wanted it done, yesterday, I would say, well, that's not going to happen. We're not going to get it done yesterday, because even tomorrow, it might take several months because your spouse is not psychologically ready to even accept that this is happening or that this is actually going to be a good thing in the long run. So as you said, the mindset is so important. And whether you want to, nobody wants to get divorced, but you have to get out of denial. So that's the first step. And then recognize that the divorce is going to happen. And you tell your clients, and I tell mine, it doesn't matter whether you want this to happen, it's going to happen. So the question is, do you want to be an active participant in what is about to happen? Or are you going to just, passively sit back and let your spouse file with an aggressive divorce lawyer in court, and then you're going to be stuck dealing with it anyways, whether you want to or not? So it's really just a question of creating the space and an opportunity to understand that this is happening. We're all very sorry that it's happening, and it's going to be okay. Like, it will be okay so long as you can get a team of supportive people around you, lawyers, mental health professionals, and financial neutrals, so that you're not overwhelmed and that the team understands that this is a grieving process, and we're going to give you enough time to relax into this new reality, which is shocking for people.
It is. And I think what you just said a second ago about people feeling blindsided, which is really a fiction. It just means you weren't paying attention. Because that's what I tell my guys. But sometimes it's even worse than not recognizing the divorces going forward. Sometimes people think that it's just a phase. They're, I'll use men. They think their wives are just going through a phase, and, she's going to come back to you, and it's all going to be okay. And so sometimes the resistance to moving forward is really not so much about the divorce, not recognizing the divorce might happen. It's because they honestly think that the marriage is going to be saved because their wife will come to terms with what's going on. And so sometimes people are saying, okay, I'll wait until I get a complaint, or I'll wait till I get something from court, and then I'll know that the divorce is really over. So it's all fun. You and I are talking, about people that reach out to attorneys and actually are looking for an attorney for some advice. What would you say to somebody who's sitting there and their wives have said, I want to get divorced, and they honestly think that their wife is going to come back to them? Is your advice just that, listen, no matter what you think, you should go talk to an attorney, and it really should always be a collaborative attorney? What would you tell that person?
Sure. Denial runs deep. And so I represent a lot of men and women, and I've represented children too. So I've been all over the gamut. So I would just say it's possible that your wife is going to come back to you, and it's also possible that she's not. So depending on, let's just assume for the sake of argument that she's not coming back, and that wouldn't we rather get her hooked up with a lawyer who's in a collaborative space, so that that if she's really serious, she's not going to just go to court. And I think that's what creates the safety, that safe container, is knowing that no one's going to get screwed over in a collaborative divorce, because the lawyers are not going to allow that to happen. We're not interested in that. We want to just help you get through this process in the best way possible, recognizing that it's a challenge. And so for that fellow who's saying, oh, she's going to come back, I'd say, well, she might, but she may not. And if she doesn't, don't you want to have a little more control over how this is going to go forward? And then usually they'd say, well, if you really think so. And I'm like, yeah, I really think so. Because if she says she's going, I mean, it's true. It just happened last week. It's very common that, there's a threat, and it could go on for 20 years. It's like, oh, you should leave. And it's like, well, one day maybe I will. And then they never do. And then they go back, and relationships are so complicated, and each couple has their own dynamic. And so I'm not going to just say, oh, you're wrong, she's not going to come back. She might. And I could also say, if it's really meant to be and you're not going to get divorced, then even in a collaborative case, you could certainly reconcile. We all, we have a romantic side. We want to support love. We're not we're not all cynics. And so maybe it will work out. But it seems to me, I would say, that you have a communication issue going on, and the collaborative process can facilitate improved communication, because we model non-defensive communication. We say things like, say what you mean what you say, and don't say it mean. And just try that. And even, rather than getting into a fight, we might encourage a couple to say, well, you might be right. Just try that. If you're about to get into a fight and your spouse is coming at you, rather than engaging in this conflict behavior, which is to defend or justify your position, which I understand, just say, oh, you may be right. Or let me think about it. Just take some space and just conceive of the idea that person could be right. You're not saying they're right. They might hear it as, oh, she thinks I'm right. But you don't have to say that. You just say, oh, you may be right. And just to not engage in the chronic conflict. And so in a collaborative model, we work on that. We work on how to communicate more effectively. And sometimes we use divorce coaches. We would send a couple to an adjunct divorce coach to practice the weekly communication that might be necessary, especially if you have children. So it's a model. And like you said earlier, I just want to harken back. We judge success by a divorce where you feel that, like you said, that your procedural needs were met, that the process was fair, that you feel heard, that you understood what was going on, that you have informed consent, you know what's happening each step of the way. We use a roadmap to keep you on task, that you feel procedurally, substantively, the ultimate substantive agreement, the thing that you write down at the end of the day, that is an uncontested divorce. You never go to court. You mail it in, you get it back. It's a little anticlimactic. So the whole thing is designed to be a bit of a divorce ritual, since there aren't really any good divorce rituals. So the collaborative divorce is it's like your own little mini ritual. So you feel like the final agreement is reasonable, under the circumstances, and 6 months, 8 months, however long it takes, you're going to be a different person than that first couple of weeks when you feel like your world is crashing down because somebody wants to get divorced, and you have to process what does this really mean for my identity, and who am I, and who do I think I was, and what was that if it wasn't what I thought it was? And it's a lot of existential kind of angst that a divorce creates for you. And so I think you want to encourage people to take the time to look within and start to realize what their potential contributions were to the breakup of the marriage. Because, I say if you're pointing the finger at somebody else, there are 3 pointing back at you. So people want to always blame the other person, but you have to, at some point in this process, hopefully, accept some responsibility for your contribution, make an amends, make an apology at some point where it's appropriate and it's safe and you're ready. And then just have some closure, have some emotional closure so that you're not that couple duking it out in family court. Somebody wins the case and then everybody is miserable for the rest of their lives and your children are screwed up. So like there are options. So that's what I would want to encourage your people to understand, that there are options and you don't have to just call the first shark that you find on the, on the internet or that your friends and family tell you about, because collaborative divorce is like divorce's best kept secret. It's been around for 30 years, but it's been slow to get into the mainstream, I think, because the litigation lawyers are not interested in changing their paradigm. They're not interested in shifting the way they do business. And I think when the clients understand that that's what you want a more heart-centered place. You don't want to be fighting with the person that you declared in front of your friends and family 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that you love them. Like, you don't want that to just be for naught, right? And you want to honor the relationship to the extent that you can, even though you're upset, even though you're mad, even though you might be working toward contempt for each other. You don't want to get so heightened about that negative space of just feeling like you hate your spouse. Like, that's a terrible place to like start a divorce. And we know that you may feel that way, but your feelings are going to change over time if you have good coaching and good support.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if you go for that shark, and now all of a sudden you've given your child's college funds to an attorney, and you're still going to be unhappy at the end of the process. And I think that's the way you have to look at it. So I have a couple questions for you based on what you were just talking about. Let's say that, you go to a collaborative law attorney because you educated yourself, you learned about collaborative law, you thought that was going to be the best thing for you and your family. You go to a collaborative law attorney like Nanci, and then your wife or husband goes and retains the shark. What do you do then, Nanci?
All right, so that's a moment in time that you have to take stock. So it happens. So the real key is the early communication. So when you're starting to talk with your spouse about getting divorced, you also want to, in that same sentence, talk about the process that you're going to choose to get divorced. And so if in the same sentence, when you're about to announce that you want a divorce, you can also say, and I've spoken to a collaborative lawyer and she sounded pretty cool, or he sounded pretty cool, and there's a way to do this in a way that we're not going to ruin each other's lives. We're going to be able to demonstrate resilience in the face of adversity to our children. We're not going to ruin our kids. Let's just at least agree to that and maybe give a couple of names. So that would be the preference, is to, like, as part of your pitch when you're announcing that you want the divorce, to talk about process at the same time so that you don't scare your spouse into going to call the shark. So if they've already done that, then you could say, look, would you at least consider getting a second opinion and talking to a different attorney? And then most collaborative lawyers would give a list for their spouse of several lawyers in either a practice group, because that's how we kind of operate across the country, in little pods called practice groups, where they are interdisciplinary professional membership groups where people refer to each other and they work as teams. So they get to know each other, they trust each other. This is the crazy radical thing about collaborative, is the lawyers actually trust each other to be supportive and to collaborate in a good way on behalf of the client. So we don't have to worry, like, if we made a mistake, our collaborative colleague is not going to use it against us. They're going to point it out and be like, hey, did you notice you missed a zero? And you're like, oh my God, I didn't. So rather than worrying that you're going to get taken advantage of, nobody's getting taken advantage of. So we can relax and just deal with the emotional aspects of the divorce, gather information, generate options, and then come up with a resolution that works for everybody. So if that spouse has already gone to somebody else, you just ask them nicely, like, could you please at least do me a courtesy as my final gift, my final ask before we separate for the rest of our lives? Can we at least try? Would you at least keep an open mind and go talk to a collaboratively trained attorney and see if you like that process, if you feel like we could do that? And most people, unless there's active abuse or active addiction or serious mental health issues that are not being addressed, that where you would need to go to court, or somebody stealing money, or there's like fraud. If you need to go to court, of course you go to court. But for the vast majority of people who they have a house, they've got some savings, they've got investments, they've got a 401k, they've got maybe a couple properties, and there's going to be spousal support because there's a differential in the incomes. And the kids are maybe not even adult children have experienced the divorce of their parents in a very significant way. So you want to be mindful about all of that. And then how are you going to tell the children? Like, that's a super important first things first kind of collaborative opportunity, is to set the narrative, set the tone. What are you going to say? Are you going to allow, an infidelity to like become the narrative? So all of a sudden everyone hates you because you stepped out of the marriage. Like, you don't want that. You don't need that. The kids don't need it. So you want to say, look, can you please give me the respect of getting a second opinion? And then you can always fire a lawyer. You can just say, I'm sorry, it's not going to work out, and get your money back and go somewhere else.
All right. So I have two questions based on this. One is, okay, let's say that somebody has a good friend that's an attorney and they really want to use that attorney, but they're open to the collaborative law process. So question number one is, would you work with somebody that hasn't been collaboratively trained, but is at least open to the concept and willing to learn and sort of learn as you go? Because if one person really feels comfortable with an attorney, it's going to help the entire process. And then the second question that you can address after that is, what's the difference between collaborative law and mediation? If you have a really simple case, why not just go to a mediator?
Good. Okay. So number one, okay, say your best friend is a lawyer and you've been married for a while. So your spouse is going to know that your best friend is also going to be now your spouse's lawyer. So that's going to already set up defensiveness in your spouse. Your spouse is going to be very suspicious of that dynamic. And so that's number one. So probably best not to involve your friends. That would be my first recommendation. Secondly, if it wasn't a friend, but we just changed the hypothetical a little bit, but it's just another lawyer who's curious about collaborative but has never done one, would I do it with them? It would really depend, because the lawyers all know each other in small communities. And so if I thought that lawyer had a reputation as being a mediator and or settling cases out of court and wasn't me 25 years ago, I'd say, okay. But if somebody came to me 25 years ago before I had actually done any training in collaborative and wanted to do this model with me, I don't know that I would really have shifted my paradigm enough that I could trust. I would have to be on my toes, right? So it changes the dynamic. But we want to encourage other lawyers to engage in the process and hope that they would do the training that it takes. There's a basic introductory training that every collaborative lawyer who holds themselves out as a collaborative divorce attorney engages in, so that we know that we have a basic level of expertise and experience in the collaborative model. So would I try it? I might try it. It would really depend. Do I think a best friend should ever represent somebody in a divorce? I think that's a terrible idea. And I would find neutral people to manage that. To the second point about why collaborative versus mediation. Mediation is a great model for the less complex case, or for the couple who doesn't feel like they need all that additional support. And maybe they've been separated for a while. There's not a lot of conflict. There's a lot of agreement, and they just need a neutral third person to facilitate the conversation and maybe help them draft agreements. That's a great model. Mediation is a great model. It has a lot of control, and the cost is very modest, and it's great for people who are on equal bargaining footing and who feel competent to advocate for themselves. That's not everybody. And sometimes, when the differential in either the income or the experience, like even if you've got somebody who's the primary wage earner and somebody who's been a primary caregiver at home, who really is in control over the money, who's in control over the finances, who's in control over the children historically, and are you going to feel like you're on equal bargaining footing to go into a negotiation to ask for what you truly want and need? And I encourage clients to talk to separate counsel, mostly collaborative divorce counsel, because they will give you objective information, and they're not going to be rushing you to sign you up with large retainers, and they're not going to be rushing you off to the courthouse. So I always think it's a safe choice to look when you need legal advice beyond just the mediator, because of course the mediator is neutral and they're not giving legal advice. When you need legal advice, to just Google your local collaborative divorce attorneys and talk to a couple of them, and then compare it to somebody who does the litigation model, and then assess for yourself. Where do you feel like you lie on that, and what do you hope to gain by not going to court? And then think about those questions.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation of why mediation might be good in certain cases and not good in other cases. A lot of times when people come into the process and they don't want to do litigation, they want to keep it amicable. A lot of times that's code for we want to keep our costs down.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're dealing with collaborative law, it sounds great. We've got two attorneys, we've got other people involved. How often does the cost of a collaborative case get to the point where it starts to look more like a litigation case, or does it usually stay closer to what a mediation case would look like?
It's right. It's a great question. It's a fair question. It's right in the middle. It's obviously more expensive than mediation, unless it's probably double what mediation is, right? Because maybe you could do a flat fee mediation and you have a certain number of hours. So it's more than mediation because you've got the support of the team and you've got two lawyers and all that. So there's greater upfront costs to hire the neutrals in addition to your attorney. So the upfront costs are a little higher. The long-term costs are significantly reduced from litigation. And they're more like your average garden variety divorce when you have two lawyers and you're in the adversarial process, but you still know that you're going to get it resolved, because truthfully, 98% of cases across the country settle. It's just a question of how is it going to settle? Is it going to settle while you have support at the very beginning when you're feeling all emotional, or is it going to settle when you're still feeling pretty heightened and emotional, and now you've spent a ton of money on your lawyers and you're going to settle it on the courthouse steps the day that your contested hearing is set for, or the first day or the third day of your trial. So most cases settle unless it's really, really complex, in which case you might want to be in court anyways. But even complex cases can settle in a collaborative model, and it really depends on the couple and where are you emotionally and psychologically. Are you ready to get divorced? And so it's, the cost, there's always going to be costs for everything, but mediation definitely cheaper. Do it yourself is the cheapest. Go to a mediator, that's the next level. Collaborative divorce is the middle model. And then litigation is, of course, your most expensive option, both emotionally and financially.
Sounds like the hardest part of this is that whole adage that it takes two to tango. You've got to have both spouses that sign on to this. And you've been doing this quite a while. I'm wondering, do you have any stories of how long it's taken somebody to convince their spouse to sign on to this collaborative law model before you've been able to actually proceed?
Well, I try not to look at it as convincing anybody of anything, because I don't need to sell anything. Like, the process sells itself. If you talk to a collaborative attorney, they're very passionate about what they do. They really believe in the process of setting goals, identifying interest, gathering the information, having the appropriate professional deal with it. So like the lawyer doesn't have to read your financial disclosures. So, the couple has financial disclosures and a marital estate of some sort, and then each lawyer is going to paw through it. Maybe their paralegals are going to look at it, before the lawyer then looks at it, and then the lawyer looks at it and scratches their head and says, I don't know, maybe we need an expert, and then you go hire an expert, and then the other side hires an expert. So like we cut through all that, and we just say, we've got a team, we've got one neutral for financial, that person's going to collect all of your financial data, and when it all is organized in the financials head and on their spreadsheets, they're going to come together and they're going to explain it to you, and then they're going to explain it to the rest of us, and then we're going to generate some options based on what the reality is. Like, we just deal very concretely with what reality is, while also recognizing that you don't need a lawyer at every step of your divorce. It takes 6 months in most jurisdictions to get divorced, and so during those 6 months, just use that as an opportunity to gather the information, make educated decisions, work on your emotions, work on your communication. Building trust and accountability is super important. Like, by the time you first come to the lawyers, nobody trusts anybody, nobody's communicating well, it's like a giant mess. And then this is the opportunity to say, okay, yes, it's a giant mess, however, it doesn't have to be like this. It won't be like this forever if both of us can, like you said, take some responsibility. It is a two to tango. You can't, so like the whole idea of convincing anybody of anything, I'm too old to convince anybody of anything. People can do what they want to do, but there are options, and I think people need to know that there are options. And then if you're inclined toward that, I suspect your spouse is going to be somewhat inclined to it, unless it's like that first one who just wanted to put their head in the sand and pretend it wasn't happening. But even that person, after they talk to one of us, will realize, okay, she might be serious. she might be serious this time. Like you just never know. You never know. And you might reconcile, which is fine. But at least you're not going to get screwed over. I think the bar is so low that people are so scared when they think about getting divorced and dealing with divorce lawyers. And anything that we can do to just kind of elevate the conversation and to just assure people that you will be okay. And frankly, actually, you're going to be better because you're not going to have this like albatross around your neck, and you're not, you're going to be like who you were meant to be before you got married and had kids.
I really think that is such an excellent answer, that the process sells itself. I really love that. And if I was still handling, I was going to say contested cases, but I don't know what phrase I'm going to look for here. But dealing with non-mediation cases, I would definitely want to be collaboratively trained. This sounds like so much of a better process for everybody involved. And I'm making my other attorneys in my office get trained. So that kind of leads me to the next issue here, which is, let's say you live out in the middle of nowhere. You live in this rural area, and there's maybe only 3 or 4 divorce attorneys anywhere. What do you do when you really want this process, but there's just not any collaboratively trained attorneys around?
Yeah, so, all right, the pandemic has been super hard on everybody, but the one good thing that it has done is it's created these platforms for us to be able to engage with each other. So you just need to type in collaborative lawyer, in your state, and you will find some. And then you do it on Zoom, and you engage, and you never have to leave your house or your small little county. So it's actually a bit of a blessing. In the old days, we would get together. I'd make a bit of a ritual of it. We'd have, tea and coffee, and I'd bring in cookies because I feel like if you can break bread and have a little sweets, maybe chocolate, fruit, whatever, it just sort of softens the mood. But that was kind of expensive, and we had to pay for the lawyers to, drive and get there. But now on Zoom, everybody's dialed in. We have agendas. We're super efficient. We know what we're doing. So I would encourage clients to just Google collaborative divorce attorneys in their state, frankly, and everybody's doing it on Zoom. So it makes it really easy.
That's great. So everybody listening, you don't have to have one right next to you. You could have somebody that lives in a totally different part of the state that is helping you, because this is not a court process. You just need somebody who practices in that state to represent you. And I think that's a great message. All right. So we've been talking a lot about why you should do collaborative law and how you find a collaborative law attorney. I'd like to, and you've been touching a little bit on the process, but I'd like to dive in a little bit deeper. So can you just describe for us, Nanci, the kind of the general procedure that's followed whenever a collaborative divorce starts?
Sure. So the first thing that happens is both clients commit, and they can come in the door through either the financial neutral, like there could be a financial person who's working with a couple, and they would make the referral to a couple of collaborative divorce lawyers. They wouldn't be allowed to be the neutral in a case that they're already representing the couple, and same thing with the mental health coach. Like there could be a mental health professional who's working with a couple in couples counseling, but they realize this isn't working, they need to get divorced, but you could refer to collaborative divorce lawyers, and then a different neutral would come in. So once the clients agree to do the process, then generally the lawyers put together a team, or it could be the financial neutral, however the client comes through. And then you sign a participation agreement. So this is the key, which makes collaborative divorce different than everything else. So the participation agreement lays out your rights and your responsibilities and how you're going to engage with integrity, honesty, transparency, mutual respect, basic core values that lead throughout the entire case. And so if somebody abuses the process or tries to take advantage, or there's something that happens, or a client wants to withdraw after they get into it, then the lawyers, it's called a disqualification clause. And in that contract, it says the lawyers are going to get out. So if you get into a collaborative case, we all want to be really mindful that it's going to be a good fit, which is why we have the first thing that happens after the clients agree to it is they get interviewed by the mental health professional, who is basically a coach. They're not providing therapy, but they're there to help normalize all of the intense emotions and to help facilitate the communication. So there's a deep dive. You talk to the neutral, the mental health neutral. The mental health neutral kind of has a conversation with the lawyers. We get a deep dive into understanding divorce triggers a lot of family of origin and childhood stuff. I mean, attachment issues come up, just how you're dealing, parents and their own bad divorces, and all these things start to churn in your head. So we want to get it all out in the open so that we're not fighting with, demons that we don't even see or we've never named and we don't even know exist. So that's really one of the other benefits is we just do a deep dive. We understand where you guys are both at psychologically. Do we need to slow down? What's the pace? Where are you all at? And then we schedule a meeting, and the meetings we talk about, we have agendas, we set agendas in advance. We talk about pressing concerns. Do we have cash flow issues? Do we have how to tell the children issues? Can we work on the narrative, the divorce narrative, super important. Something like very simple, like mom and I have decided to divorce. We love you guys. We love you kids. We want to assure you that you will not have divided loyalties. We've got a plan in place. If you have a plan, if you don't have a plan, you might want to wait until you tell the kids once you have a plan. But, you can talk through that with the lawyers. We can choreograph when you should say that, what time of the day, what room are you going to be in? Is there going to be a small script? Keep it really short, very simple. How are you going to tell your friends and family? Like letting people know that you're engaging in a different way of getting divorced. It's not your parents' divorce. It's like the way you're going to do it with integrity and mutual respect. And that you're going to be a family. It's just going to look different, and you're going to have two homes. I mean, and be pretty concrete and matter of fact about it. And of course, depending on the ages of your children, you'll have to adjust your narrative. But keeping it simple, keeping it consistent, having that be the mantra. So especially if you're living in a small town and you don't want people gossiping about you, you just want to have everybody say the same thing so that if your kids start talking to their grandparents or an aunt or something, it's not like, oh, yeah, I heard your dad, or your mom, messed around and had an affair or something like that. Like you don't want people in control over your narrative. So you want to control your narrative. And then we start the process of, if we need a financial neutral, we get one. If we don't, then, we'll just start collecting financial data, which has to be disclosed in every divorce anyways. We gather the information, we collect it, and then we start to generate ideas. And this is the cool thing. We don't even put an idea on the table until everybody agrees that everybody's ready to let go. Because, John, you probably remember this from your litigation days. Sometimes you could get to the end and you think you've got everything worked out, and all of a sudden people are fighting over something that does not make sense, like a piece of furniture or some personal property thing. And the lawyers are scratching their heads. We're like, we got the whole thing done. Why are they fighting? And it's never what it appears to be. In my experience, things are never what they appear to be. It's always something emotional. It's a not wanting to let go. It's not being ready to let go. So personal property seems like it shouldn't be a big deal, but often it becomes the one concrete thing that really just hits home that this is actually happening, and it can be quite emotional. So brace yourself when you start dealing with personal property and removing it from the home. It's a big trigger for a lot of people. But eventually, by the time we get to it, people are able to work through it, and we just recognize that it's going to be an emotional day when you start moving your stuff out of the house. But everybody plans for it. And then I think so long as people are aware of what to expect, they can get through their divorce in a really good way and show their children how to handle adversity with dignity and respect. That's kind of the gift that you give to your kids. Like, I don't know a better way to do it, really, except being authentic, honest, showing up, being a decent human being, being who you know you are, and somehow you've just kind of lost yourself because the marriage dynamic kind of got the better of you at a moment or two. But it doesn't have to stay like that. And every moment is an opportunity for growth and change. And I think this process just allows you to do that if you're open to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the moral of this is do collaborative law for your kids. Do a collaborative divorce for your kids. Don't even do it for you. Do it for your kids. Because they will thank you at some point that you didn't drag them through a nasty litigated case where mom and dad are pissed off at each other all the time, and they never learn to communicate. And then, as you know, Nanci, if you don't learn to communicate during the divorce, more often than not, you find yourself in the court system and in litigation in perpetuity, constantly having to get attorneys involved because you didn't learn how to resolve anything. You didn't learn those skills. So you've just been talking about all the different people that could be involved, coaches, financial neutrals. some people might be listening to this and being like, Nanci, this sounds like it could get really expensive. So I think what I heard you say a second ago is the cost is really more divided up in a collaborative case. Instead of your attorney doing everything and paying them whatever you pay your attorney, you've got people that have more specialized knowledge doing little bits and pieces to help you along the way. Is that a correct way of looking at it?
Yes, exactly. It's efficient. It's built-in efficiencies because you've got the expert with the knowledge in the particularly discrete area of lawyers, the legal area, the financial area, and there's one financial neutral usually, not two. So there's one expert that's accepted by everybody as a good egg, an honest dealer, an honest broker who knows what they're doing. And then you've got the one or two coaches in different parts of the country. Some people have one coach and some people have two coach, one coach model or a two coach model. So, but that's it. Like, so when you're dealing with parenting plans and maybe you need a child specialist or whatever you need, you can get, and the lawyers don't have to dominate the process. We don't dominate the process, and we don't have to be involved in every single detail about like your parenting schedule. Like, come up with your parenting schedule that works for you guys and work it out with the mental health coach. They're a lot cheaper than having two lawyers argue about whether it's, a Sunday break or it's 50-50 or it's 70-40 or, 70-30 or whatever you think it is, whether it's a Wednesday overnight. Like, you don't need the lawyers at our hourly rate arguing about whether it's Wednesday night at 5 or Wednesday night at 8 or whatever. You got to take some responsibility and choose to work with the appropriate professional at the right time. And then it actually builds an efficiency. So the attorney's fees should be a lot less than any other model, frankly. The rest, you have these other costs, but that's just life. I mean, this is the cost of doing business, of getting divorced in a way that you can feel proud of. You can look back on and say, you know what, we did that really well. That was not easy, but we did it well. And as you said, your children can feel whole. I mean, that's the thing that kills you is when you start to put down the other parent in any way, you're just tearing the child apart from the inside because they are both of you. And if you allow yourself to kind of go to your baser emotions and stay in your contemptuous, attitude toward your spouse and how they've ruined your beautiful life and your perfect life and everything was great until, she decided to, blow it all up. I mean, you can have that thought, but keep it to yourself. Maybe once or twice share it with your lawyer, but then let it go because it's not going to serve you. It's just not going to serve you in the long run. And it's actually a gift. Like, she's giving you a gift. If she's giving you your freedom, then it's a gift. And I would take it and then figure out how you're going to manage it so that you can still be really get back to who you are and not allow, her narrative or whatever dominate. And you could create co-create a new narrative for your future. It's a real opportunity. So as I say, it's like the best kept secret of divorce practice.
Well, you're fighting against, society and culture about how divorce is perceived and how, someone who makes more money a lot of times has the perception that they're going to get screwed, and how, men who have, maybe a mother who's a stay-at-home mother, they automatically think they're going to not get to see their kids very much. And so they all come into it with I'm going to have to fight for this. I'm going to have to fight for my kids. I'm going to have to fight for this, that, or the other thing. And so I think that is hard too, just to convince somebody that you're not going to win. You're not going to lose. You need to just approach this process in a more measured way so that we can get the right outcome for your family. Mm-hmm. And I really feel like that's one of the biggest issues, even more so than finding a collaborative law attorney and going to them. It's really just fighting perception. I mean, you probably deal with it all the time when it just comes to collaborative law. I'm sure there's stuff out on the internet that misrepresents what collaborative law is and isn't. And if someone reads from somewhere, they come to you, they might be disillusioned already because they thought it was going to be this and now it's really that. So is there a place, maybe something you've done or something that somebody else has done, that people can go for really good, accurate information about collaborative law that they can also give to their spouse when they have that initial conversation that you spoke of, so that they can start to learn what it is from somebody other than the person that says, I want a divorce?
Yes. So there is, and I agree. The societal pressure, somebody was saying this to me the other day. They said, hearing about collaborative, they said, wow, it's almost like you guys are like electric cars. Everybody knows like it would be better for the environment and it's long-term sustainability and be just a good thing to do to get an electric car, but the industry is not there yet, you know? And so it's kind of like we're little disruptors, I guess. I don't really see it that way because it just seems like the natural evolution of like where we would want to be as people and as a culture, but we're not there yet. And so the place that is all things collaborative is called the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, and also you could always just call me or send me an email, and I'm happy to talk about it and help you find people in your neighborhood and in your area that would be collaborative professionals that you could help put a team together and have a conversation. I'm happy to be a consultation only. You and your spouse could call me and I'll just give you a consultation and tell you about it and help you find the people that you might need to put a team together.
Awesome. And we'll put all of that information in the show notes so people don't have to try to go back and write it down. You can just click on it in the show notes and find it. And I just think that whenever you're searching for divorce attorneys in general, the worst thing you can do is type in best divorce attorney or anything like that into Google. You really need to be searching for the right person for the process that you want. And that's what we're talking about. You've noticed Nanci hasn't talked about outcome at all, except that, you want to feel good about the outcome or at least be content. In terms of how cases get resolved, that's not really what we're talking about. We're just talking about approaching the process from a certain way. And so it's really important. I think what Nanci's been talking about is the only way that you know for sure that someone understands collaborative law and knows how to do the process as if they've been trained. So Nanci, how do you know that someone has been trained in collaborative law?
You ask. You just use your words and you ask the lawyer, have you been trained in collaborative practice? And then they'll say yes or they'll say no. If they say no, then you move on. And I really do appreciate the idea about not jumping to that conclusion yet. Everybody wants to have the conclusions. They don't see how their future is going to look yet. They don't have it all in their head, so that causes a lot of anxiety. But you're not there yet. You're just at the beginning of the divorce. You're not at the solution stage yet. And it's very tempting, even for lawyers at the beginning, even in a first consultation, be like, oh, I see the end. And the lawyers think that they can see the end. And they sort of do, because we all know that there's like a limited range of reasonableness. Most lawyers know what that looks like. And so then eventually you're going to get there. So like what John said, it's a question of how are you going to get there? We all know you're going to get there. The question is, what does that look like? Like, what does your day-to-day look like? What does it feel like? What's the tension in the house? How are we going to manage cohabitating until we get another place? What are we going to do? Like, that's where your energy needs to be. And then you just ask the lawyers, are you collaboratively trained? And usually they have a little symbol on somewhere on their website or somewhere that they're affiliated with that they've been trained by the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals. And that's the clearinghouse, national clearinghouse, international clearinghouse for all things collaborative. And the professionals who've been trained are all trained in accordance with a level, like a 2-day introductory training, interdisciplinary introductory training about how the process works. And, just being trained is the first step. But so that's why, like, going back to that earlier question, would you work with somebody who hasn't even been trained? That's a little dicey because we don't want to risk our reputation as collaborative attorneys and having a case fail because our opposing counsel couldn't switch their headset around to be more collaborative, and they start engaging in nonsensical, litigation tactics in the middle of a collaborative case. And then you're all like, wait, I thought we were going to be collaborative. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about because I've never been trained and I don't know what you're talking about. So we just want to work with people that we know, that we can trust, that we know have had the same level of experience and training. So you just ask. And I think it's a really fair question. And when the lawyer says, I don't do that, or poo-poos it, then you should probably run the other way and find somebody else, because that lawyer's got that. And I understand it and I appreciate it. And there are times and places for litigation attorneys in family court. There's no doubt. I am one. So I'm not talking out of turn. And I know that you don't always need that. You just don't always need that. And you should get a second opinion. Don't be afraid. I think sometimes clients are afraid. They think they find one and they feel like they have to stick with it, even though they don't get a good vibe. And I think it's very important that you trust your divorce lawyer, because you're going to be in this kind of long-term kind of, well, it's a limited long-term, but it's 6 months, 8 months, a year, depending on how you're feeling. And it's an intimate relationship. Obviously you're not having sex with your clients, but it's intimate in that personal level of vulnerability. Like, and especially as men, like, you don't really have a lot of people that you can be super vulnerable with, but your collaborative divorce attorney is one that you could be, because you really want them to know, like, what is actually important to you, what is actually important. And I know there's a lot of pressure, like, if you're the wage earner and you want to be the dad and you want to, everybody's got so much role pressure on us. So the real question is, like, if you're not a 50-50 guy, then just admit that early. So then it'll save everybody a lot of anxiety, because your spouse is worried about losing her identity as the primary caregiver. And you're like, I just want to have a good relationship. I want to be able to see my kids. I want to be able to coach. I want to continue with my work. I don't want to feel like I'm a shit just because I'm not taking 50-50, time. But really, it doesn't fit my life. And if it doesn't, then say that. But if you are, I want to, like, I'm working way too hard. I feel like I'm going to have a heart attack. I want to slow down. I want to be around my children. I want to be the coach. I want to be there. And you really feel that. Honestly, I'm like getting little chills, because there are people that truly, truly feel that way, but they're scared to ask for that because of the status quo. But in a collaborative model, we'd be like, what do you really want? And we'd be listening. And then if you tell us that's what you truly, truly want, that's part of your goals, then we work toward meeting your goals. Because here's the thing. Collaborative lawyers are still lawyers. So we're still kind of competitive, like, and we want to achieve, like, the outcome. We're still kind of outcome. We're interested in outcomes, and we want to get the outcome you're saying you want. So if you tell us truly, truly what you want, then that's what we're going to be, like, focused on getting for you.
Yeah, being goal-oriented is so important when you enter a divorce, and also being clear on what you want versus what you need. I mean, that's a conversation I like to have with people too. Because I think what you were just sort of talking about is, you may want 50-50 time, but what you really need is just more time with your kids, or you want to have plenty of time with your kids. And, again, that goes back to the winning mentality. That's societal. I really feel like that's one of the bad parts about our society, is that we've become a society of winners and losers, and we use those terms all the time. And in other litigation, there usually is a winner and a loser. Someone's either convicted or not convicted. Someone, wins their personal injury lawsuit, or they don't. And so there's never a winner or loser in family law cases, ever. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Never a winner. So I'm just so excited about this conversation, Nanci. I hope that people that have listened really learned a little bit about what collaborative law is. We just scratched the surface. This is really just meant to be open your eyes. There's other things out there. There's other ways to get divorced. Now, you practice in Vermont, correct?
I do, Vermont and New York. So I'm licensed in both states.
Awesome. Okay, well, that's great. So if you live in New York or Vermont and you heard this conversation and you're like, you know what, I really want to do a collaborative case, and they want to work with you, Nanci, how would they contact you?
Oh, simply just Google me, Nanci, Nanci Smith, and I'll come up. And you can call the office. You can email me, Nanci at nancysmithlaw.com. I'm Nanci with an I, so that's the only thing that's a little different. But, but everybody, feel free. And, and even if you're not in Vermont and you're somewhere else, but you just want a little more conversation about it, and bring your spouse. I mean, I'm happy to talk to two of you on a high-level consultation only kind of way, and just help facilitate the conversation. And I appreciate this opportunity, John. It's like, it is. I think you should just get trained, and then we can do a case,
Yeah, I think that's...
If you're licensed in New York.
I am licensed in New York. How about that? Now, I think you were talking about a minute ago that regardless of where you live, because of the way that we're doing a lot of cases these days with technology, you could still help them. So is that to say that if someone lived, let's say, New York City, you could still help them?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And because it's statewide, lawyers, just so that your people know, lawyers are licensed in various states. And so so a lawyer from Vermont is not allowed to practice in Oklahoma, or anywhere else, unless you're licensed by that state. So for me, I'm licensed in Vermont. So if you live in Vermont, feel free to call me. If you live in New York, I'm also licensed in New York. So yeah. And then, but if you're somewhere else, I wouldn't practice law. I wouldn't be able to take your collaborative case, but I could hook you up with other collaborative lawyers in your jurisdiction, and then help you, make some phone calls and ask your questions, get your list together, and just be able to facilitate the conversation. But definitely don't be shy of asking your lawyers if they practice collaborative divorce, because I think if you want that, if this is speaking to you, then you should get it. And if it's not mediation, because it's just an easier model. It just gives you some space to breathe and allow this process to unfold in a way where you're not always just forcing things and feeling uptight and anxious about the future. It just allows you to relax a little bit.
I was going to say, if this isn't speaking to you, then I don't know if you were paying enough attention, because this should speak to everybody who is thinking about, even if you started a divorce, as Nanci said before, you don't have to stay with a litigation attorney. You can always go over to a collaborative attorney and do that process. So always keep that in mind. Keep your kids at the front and center of the entire process. I always tell people kids watch everything you do. And they watch even when you don't think they're watching. When you have your attorney write those nasty letters or file things in court where you say all the horrible things about your spouse, guess what? One day your child might read that. Just remember that. And something that I think whenever that sobers a lot of people, when they start to think that their child might read that they called their mother all kinds of horrible names.
Yep.
So please, if you're considering divorce or you're in the middle of it now, do collaborative divorce. You'll thank everybody, and you can send Nanci a thank you card that she introduced you to this entire process.
I'd be grateful and humbled. It's a great opportunity, and it is an opportunity to do things better and do things different. And if it's a little disruptive in our culture, oh well.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, Nanci.
Thank you.
All right. And if you want to work with Nanci, she has a great website, and we will post that in the show notes. If you live in New York or Vermont, you're interested in collaborative law, give Nanci a call. And if you live anywhere and you're just a little confused about what we discussed today, or you want to ask her some more questions, it sounds like she would be open to hearing from you. So everybody take care, and we'll see you next time.